Today, we're going into a space that is incredibly personal and, for many, a really contentious piece of history.
It's a challenging one. We're looking at the Baha'i Faith, but specifically at the period right after the passing of Abdu'l-Baha in 1921.
And this isn't about high-level theology. This is really a deep dive into the conflicts right at the heart of the central family. We're going to be focusing on the character and the actions of the new leader, Shoghi Effendi, and critically his wife, Ruhiyyih Khanum.
It's fundamentally a tragic family drama. I mean, that's what it boils down to. And it's a drama that completely shapes the future of the faith's leadership. We're examining these intense, agonizing decisions that were made.
And there's this paradox at the center of it all, which, when you read the source material, is just, it's shocking. You have the actual descendants of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha, I mean, the people raised by the master who gave their entire lives to the cause. And they end up being systematically expelled, shunned, labeled covenant breakers, and not by some outside force, but by their own brother, their own cousin, Shoghi Effendi, the man appointed to lead them.
And this is a perspective that has been, for the most part, unheard for a very long time, for decades, really. The voices of Abdu'l-Baha's own children and grandchildren were, well, they were silent.
So where are we getting this from?
Our analysis is pulled from historical documents, personal narratives, memoirs. You can find them on what's referred to as the website of the family of Abdu'l-Baha. And this perspective is just so vital because it explains the why they chose silence over conflict for so long.
So our mission for you today is pretty comprehensive. We're going to unpack the details behind this complete family severance. We need to look at the power dynamics when Shoghi Effendi first took over.
And then the marriage, the hugely controversial marriage.
Exactly. And that leads to this pattern of excommunications, people being cast out for personal choices, for who they chose to marry. It all comes down to a demand for absolute, unquestioning obedience.
And we want to understand the full tragic result of all this, especially how it led to the completely unplanned end of the guardianship itself.
Okay, let's set the scene. It's 1921. Abdu'l-Baha, the center of the faith, passes away. And in his will and testament, he does something monumental. He names his eldest grandson, Shoghi Effendi, as the first guardian of the cause.
This is a world-changing appointment. I mean, it establishes a whole new institution. And Shoghi Effendi is young. He was born in 1897, so he's only in his mid-20s.
And he's not even there, right? He's not in Haifa at the center of things?
No, he's studying abroad. He's at Oxford University. So this news just drops on him from thousands of miles away.
So he gets this letter, this document that gives him this enormous spiritual and administrative power. But what the sources reveal is this huge gap between the official position and, well, his personal state of mind. What was his reaction?
It was a profound personal crisis.
Yeah.
He didn't step into the role with this, air of confidence. It was the absolute opposite.
Really?
The narratives describe him as feeling unable, ill-equipped, or unworthy, just completely crushed by the weight of it. He saw how huge the task was, and he felt he just couldn't do it.
So this isn't just a bit of self-doubt. The documents call it a mental breakdown, a genuine emotional collapse.
That's right. And his first instinct wasn't to lead. It was to hide, to withdraw. He needed solitude.
So where did he go?
Initially, for about 3 months, he stayed at his aunt's house, Ruhiyyih Khanum's home, which was right next door to the master's house. But even being that close seems to have been too much for him.
So he leaves.
He leaves completely. For about a year, he travels around Europe, spending most of his time in Switzerland, just away from it all.
He wasn't totally alone, though. I read that his cousin, Ruhiyyih Afnan, went with him.
Yes, his cousin and his good friend, Ruhiyyih Afnan, acted as his secretary during that time. And he later wrote about the irony of it, being appointed secretary when for long stretches there were no letters to attend to.
Wow.
The point is that this new central institution of the guardianship, the thing that was supposed to be the anchor for the whole global community, it began with its leader in a state of intense instability, fragile and absent for a year.
That initial fragility is so key. But let's talk about the family he had around him, the people who were actually there ready to support him. Who are we talking about specifically?
We're talking about the immediate blood relatives. You have two main groups, the Afghans and the Ahsans, but they're all intertwined. The most important people here are Abdu'l-Baha's 4 surviving daughters.
That's Zia Khanum, who is Shoghi Effendi's mother.
Right. And then Tuba Khanum, Ruhiyyih Khanum, and Monawar Khanum, and all of their children, who were Shoghi Effendi's siblings and his first cousins.
And the master, Abdu'l-Baha, he'd really invested in this generation, hadn't he? Made sure they were all highly educated.
Incredibly so, both the men and the women. And when Shoghi Effendi was appointed, The sources are absolutely clear on this. Their response was one of total, unified loyalty.
No arguments. No one questioning the appointment.
None whatsoever.
Yeah.
They respected the master's will. They committed themselves 100% to supporting Shoghi Effendi, to serving the cause however they could. You had this group of brilliant, dedicated, educated people ready to go.
And their unity was based on something deeper, right? A kind of historical trauma.
Oh, absolutely. They were terrified of repeating the conflicts of the past. The painful splits with figures like Mirza Yahya or Mirza Muhammad Ali. That was the stuff of nightmares for them.
So they consciously decided not to fight.
They refused to start arguments. Their belief was simple. The faith is true, the master's will must be obeyed, and their duty is to serve their cousin, the new guardian. And it's that deep foundational loyalty that makes what happens next so much more tragic.
Okay, so you have this unified, capable, loyal family ready to serve. And on the other side, you have a new leader who is, by his own admission, feeling vulnerable, ill-equipped, and is emotionally fragile.
And that's where you can trace the psychological line. That early instability, that feeling of being ill-equipped, it seems to have directly created his later leadership style.
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. If you're placed in a position of infallibility, but inside you feel deeply insecure, how do you compensate?
You demand absolute control. You eliminate any possible challenge.
Precisely. You get rid of anyone with an independent thought. The master's whole idea of consultation, of checks and balances, the sources say that just disappeared.
He was replaced by something else.
It was replaced by one dominant rule, especially when it came to his own family. Don't think, obey.
Wow.
That requirement for complete conformity and unswerving service became the only test of loyalty. And who are the first people you're going to test that on?
The people closest to you, the ones who knew you when you were weak.
Exactly. His immediate family.
Yeah.
They might have their own memories of what the master wanted. They saw him in his moments of crisis. They represented the biggest potential for independent thought, and so they became the biggest threat to the absolute authority he felt he needed.
That is such a critical frame for understanding this. He didn't just want obedience. He needed it. He needed it to be absolute, to protect this authority that he felt internally was so fragile.
And that intense dynamic, that pressure cooker of authority and vulnerability, it leads us right to the one event that the sources identify as the catalyst, the thing that finally shattered all family relations.
His marriage.
His marriage in 1937 to Mary Maxwell, a Canadian woman who would become known as Ruhiyyih Khanum.
Let's talk about her, Mary Maxwell. Who was she?
She was the daughter of a very prominent Canadian Baha'i family, and the sources, even citing external historians, describe her as having a very strong character. She was dynamic, no question. She eventually became a hand of the cause, one of the highest appointed positions, and she wrote the main biography of Shoghi Effendi's life.
But the family narrative tells a very different story. It reveals this huge gap between the marriage that happened and the marriage the family believed Abdul-Baha had actually wanted for Shoghi Effendi.
Yes. According to these family sources, the master had a specific vision. He wished for Shoghi Effendi to marry his cousin, Maryam. She was the daughter of his aunt, Ruhiyyih Khanum.
So a marriage within the family to keep the lineage rooted?
That was the idea, for continuity. And Maryam was described as one of the family beauties. She was right there, a clear and available choice.
But Shoghi Effendi chose Mary Maxwell instead.
He did. The sources say he had set his eyes on Mary Maxwell. And then you get this heartbreaking little detail from the sources that sort of sealed the decision.
What was that?
Maryam, the cousin, the preferred choice. She developed Hodgkin's disease while she was a student in Paris, and her diagnosis was incurable.
Oh, wow.
And the narrative suggests that this tragic illness made the decision easier for Shoghi Effendi to go ahead and pursue Mary Maxwell.
So the person who represented that family continuity was just medically taken out of the picture, and that cleared the path for Mary Maxwell to become the guardian's wife. The woman the sources call the overpowering wife.
And that leads us directly to the single biggest consequence of this marriage, the one that affected the entire institution of the guardianship.
The fact that it was childless.
Yes. The sources are very direct about this. They assert that Ruhiyyih Khanum was unable to bear children. The family records mention accounts from ladies who nursed her, others who consulted doctors in Jerusalem. They all confirmed that because of a problem that existed, she was unable to bear children.
And this isn't just a personal tragedy. In this context, it's a huge theological and administrative crisis. Why?
Because of the clear text of Abdul-Baha's will. The will established the guardianship, but it also specified how it would continue.
Right.
Abdul-Baha required Shoghi Effendi to appoint a successor from his own sons.
His own sons. It's that specific.
It's that specific. It's written into the foundational document of the new administration. So no sons, no successor. The entire line of guardianship, as specified in the will, just ends. And the sources call this an absolute tragedy.
But the family narrative goes even further. It doesn't just say this was a tragedy. It levels a direct accusation at Ruhiyyih Khanum's motives for going through with the marriage, knowing this.
And this is where the critique gets incredibly sharp. Ruhiyyih Afnan, Shoghi Effendi's cousin, he explicitly calls the outcome of this marriage a sin greater than this was inconceivable.
That's incredibly strong language. A sin. Why?
Because, in his view, it brought the institution of the guardianship to a deliberate, premature end. It went directly against the clear instructions of the master's will. And the family source accuses Ruhiyyih Khanum of doing this because of her ambitious desire for position and power.
So the argument is she prioritized her personal status as the guardian's wife over the actual survival of the institution.
That's the accusation. It reframes the end of the guardianship. It's no longer an unfortunate biological accident. It becomes a deliberate choice, driven by ambition, that fractured the entire covenantal structure.
And that alleged ambition didn't just stop at the succession issue, did it? The sources claim she immediately began to manage Shoghi Effendi's relationship with his family.
Leading to intense strain. The sources consistently describe her as an overpowering wife.
How did she exert that influence? What did that look like in practice?
Isolation. Her primary strategy was allegedly isolation. The sources claim she saw to it that no member of the family, male or female, remained around to serve, help, or be of any assistance to him in the cause.
She cut him off.
She cut him off from anyone who might have an independent perspective. The guardian, who was already vulnerable, already seeking stability, he was allegedly managed and shielded.
And this goes right back to what you said earlier about finding his Achilles heel.
Exactly. The sources suggest she found and exploited his need for affirmation and absolute control, his ego that needed constant pumping.
And her power was in defining loyalty.
Yes, she made obedience the yardstick.
Yeah.
If you obeyed her, you were loyal to the guardian. If you showed any independent thought or any lingering affection for the master's other children, you're a threat, and you're purged.
A systematic removal of anyone who might be a check or a balance.
Or even just a source of personal affection that might compete with her influence. And to do that, to systematically remove the guardian's own siblings and cousins, you need a very powerful enforcement mechanism.
And that mechanism was the threat of excommunication.
Of being labeled a covenant breaker.
Yeah.
And facing immediate total shunning. And that's why the first big fights, the first expulsions, they weren't over theology. They were about something intensely personal, who the family married.
It's so striking that the flashpoint for these mass expulsions was marriage. It really shows that shift in leadership from spiritual guidance to demanding total personal control over every aspect of his relatives' lives.
Oh, absolutely. The sources show that right from the start, Shoghi Effendi tried to enforce a kind of control by reviving the traditional age-old custom of arranging the marriages for his family.
He had a plan, didn't he? He wanted to engineer specific matches.
He did. He ordained two specific pairings. His sister, Marangiz, was supposed to marry his cousin, Munib Shahid, and his brother, Hussein, was supposed to marry Munib's sister, Zahra.
A way to unify the family. Politically.
That was the idea. To heal some early tensions, create a solid front. And the parents were desperate for this to work. Munib and Zahra's parents, that's Ruhiyyih Khanum, Abdul-Baha's daughter and her husband, they were all in favor. They hoped it would breach the divide.
But the young people themselves?
They were not interested. They refused the arranged matches.
And once that plan failed and the cousins started to follow their own hearts, that's when the enforcement really began.
That's when it all fell apart. The first pivotal expulsion really starts with the marriages of the Afnan brothers.
So, Shoghi Effendi's sister, Ruhiyyih, she married Nair Afnan in 1928.
Right. And this is a marriage that Shoghi Effendi did not favor, nor did he forbid. It was tolerable. But then, 2 years later, her younger sister, Marangiz, decides to marry Nair's youngest brother, Hassan Afnan. And this time, she does it without getting the guardian's consent first.
And the reaction to this personal love match
was immediate.
Yeah.
And devastating. And just grossly disproportionate. Shoghi Effendi ordered his sister, Ruhiyyih Nair's wife, to travel from Haifa to Beirut immediately to stop her sister from marrying Hassan.
But there was a problem with that, wasn't there?
A huge one. The sources make a point of saying Ruhiyyih was medically in no condition to travel on that day. She was sick, but she was still forced to go.
And she failed. She couldn't convince her sister. What was the consequence for that failure?
Expulsion, swift and total, for her entire family. Ruhiyyih, her husband Nair, who was already on thin ice, and their two little girls, Baha'i and Maliheh, who was just a baby, they were all summarily expelled in 1930.
The whole family.
The whole family, cut off, treated like pariahs. The punishment for failing to enforce the guardian's will on her sister was the complete excommunication of her husband, and her children.
It sounds like Shoghi Effendi didn't see these as just personal choices. He saw them as acts of rebellion.
Precisely. He framed it that way.
Yeah.
He labeled Nair Afnan, the husband, as the primary plotter and schemer behind it all. He claimed they were weaving this mesh of marriages to serve sinister schemes.
Schemes that, according to the sources, existed only in his mind.
Right. But by framing it as a conspiracy, he could elevate a family disagreement into a major theological crime, breaking the covenant. And then the definition of a treacherous act started to expand.
How so?
It went from marrying without consent to marrying outside the faith altogether. And this is what happened to Munib Shahid.
The very same cousin Shoghi Effendi originally wanted his sister to marry.
The very same one. After being ostracized, Munib found it impossible to marry within the Baha'i community. So he married a Muslim woman, Serene Husseini, from a very prominent family in Jerusalem.
In another context, you'd think that would be celebrated. Interfaith marriage.
But not in this environment. In this controlled, isolated world, it was seen as an alliance with the enemies. Shoghi Effendi condemned it instantly. A treacherous act of alliance with enemies of the faith.
And he used that as justification for another expulsion.
A huge one. He expelled Munib's mother, Ruhiyyih Khanum, a daughter of Abdul Baha, and her entire family.
Just for what her son did.
Just for that. And Ruhiyyih Khanum, who was already struggling under all this strain, the shock sent her into a nervous breakdown. It left her an invalid for the rest of her life.
These punishments are so harsh, but they seem to get even crueler. Which brings us to this funeral ultimatum. What was that?
This anecdote just perfectly captures the level of control being demanded. Years later, Ruhiyyih Khanum is bedridden and invalid. Her younger son, Hassan, is about to marry Baha'i Afnan.
Who is the daughter of Nair Afnan, the man already labeled a plotter and expelled.
Exactly. So this wedding connects the two pariah families.
And what was the guardian's response to this?
He dispatched a hand of the cause, a high-ranking official, to deliver a personal message to this elderly, sick, bedridden daughter of Abdul Baha.
And the message was?
An explicit threat. If the marriage goes ahead, Shoghi Effendi will not allow any Baha'is to walk in your funeral.
Wow.
It's a threat of total social and religious annihilation, denying her the basic dignity of a community burial. It was the final, symbolic severing of her very soul from the faith she had served her entire life.
It's extending the punishment beyond life, into death.
It demonstrates the absolute total authority he was willing to wield. The demand for obedience had become this machine that just consumed its own family piece by piece. And at the heart of it, it wasn't about theology. It was about controlling personal choice.
And the deepest part of this tragedy is how this machine turned on his own immediate family, his parents, his aunts. Let's start with his mother, Ruhiyyih Khanum.
Ruhiyyih Khanum was Abdul Baha's eldest daughter. The sources show she was incredibly dedicated. Back in 1922, during that year when Shoghi Effendi withdrew, she was the one who stepped up. She managed the affairs of the cause with utmost sincerity and dedication.
She was the backbone while he was gone. And yet, after his marriage in 1937, their relationship just completely fractured.
The pressure on her was unbearable. You have to imagine this. She's the guardian's mother, and she is receiving explicit, direct orders from her own son to shun her other children.
To not speak to her own daughters, Ruhiyyihs and Marangis.
Or her sons, Hussein and Riaz, who were also cast out. The psychological torment of that, being forced by one child to abandon your others, it's unimaginable.
And then there's the accusation in the sources about her treatment within the master's own house.
Yes, and this detail focuses directly on Ruhiyyih Khanum. Ruhiyyih Khanum claimed that the treatment meted out to her by Ruhiyyih Khanum and by the household servants, who, importantly, took their orders directly from Ruhiyyih Khanum, made her life impossible.
What kind of treatment?
She was allegedly harassed, made to feel unwelcome in her own father's house. Eventually, she just couldn't take it anymore. She left and went to her husband's simple home at a place called Karm on Mount Carmel.
So the eldest daughter of Abdul Baha was essentially forced out of the central home of the faith.
Yes, by the environment created by the guardian's wife and her staff. But the most painful part of the story is her attempt to return.
What happened?
Ruhiyyih Khanum, after some time, she decided she should go back. She felt she should endure the insults just to be near her son, the guardian. She sent word that she wanted to return to the master's house.
And the response?
The response came from Ruhiyyih Khanum. It was an ultimatum delivered directly to Shoghi Effendi. She said, "If your mother returns, I leave."
And Shoghi Effendi.
He chose his wife. He sided with his wife against his mother. He refused to allow Ruhiyyih Khanum to return to her own childhood home. And with that, her isolation was absolute, enforced by her own son.
That really cements the family's narrative, doesn't it? That Ruhiyyih Khanum was systematically isolating him from all of his blood relatives.
It was a pattern, and it extended to his aunts, Abdul-Baha's other daughters. The rules clear. Total separation from the expelled. It was not optional.
Tell us about Manawar Khanum, the master's youngest daughter.
Her crime was affection. She was expelled simply because she had received her older sister, Ruhiyyih Khanum, too warmly when she came to visit.
Too warmly.
Yes, she showed genuine love, which proved she hadn't successfully cast out her sister in her heart, as she'd been commanded to do. And the sources say she ended her life ill and alone in a hospital in Italy, far from her home, her family, her community.
And Tuba Khanum.
Tuba Khanum had become a semi-invalid after the shock of Abdul-Baha's passing and all the conflict. She was later shunned, effectively expelled, for a similar reason. She refused to shun her own son, Ruhiyyih Khanum, after he was cast out.
A mother's love was a breach of the covenant.
Her maternal bond was seen as a direct challenge to the guardian's authority. And so the guardian's own parents, Mirza Hadi Shirazi and Ruhiyyih Khanum, they lived out their final years in total exile.
It's a spiritual exile, isn't it?
Right.
They're physically right there on Mount Carmel, but completely cut off.
Completely. A sad, secluded, and lonely life. Shunned by the entire Baha'i community who were just following the orders of their own son. They died in that isolation.
Did Shoghi Effendi ever reconcile with them, with his mother?
Only in death. Ruhiyyih Khanum died in 1951. And it was only then, upon her death, that Shoghi Effendi visited Karm for the first time in years. He arranged for her burial and later his father's in the Baha'i cemetery in Haifa.
A final cold acknowledgement.
After decades of forced separation and just emotional devastation. The whole story, it reads less like a religious administration dispute and more like a cruel, dynastic purge.
Right. And you see them not fighting for power, but just for the right to remain a family and to hold on to the master's teachings without facing complete annihilation for simple acts of love.
For most of the Baha'i world, for decades, the story they heard was the official one, that these family members were covenant breakers. Any accusation against them holds true. After all, they have come from the highest Baha'i sources.
So the big question is, why did the family let that narrative stand? Why did they endure this and just remain silent? Why not publish their side of the story immediately?
And that, I think, is the most noble and also the most painful part of their entire story. They made a conscious, unified, and deliberate decision not to fight back.
Why?
Because they were so traumatized by the history of conflict in the faith, the splits from previous generations. They believed that preserving the unity of the cause, even at the cost of their own reputations and happiness, was the most important thing.
They chose sacrifice over starting another conflict.
Exactly. They saw their collective humiliation, their pain, and we were talking about over 30 family members being expelled. They saw it as a sacrifice to the faith, a kind of shahadat, or martyrdom for the greater good.
But their sacrifice was based on a core belief, wasn't it? They believed that in their own hearts, they hadn't actually broken the covenant.
They held on to that fiercely. They kept their faith in the spiritual principles of Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha. They insisted they broke no covenant related to the guardianship itself. They respected Shoghi Effendi's position as guardian.
But not his personal orders.
They drew a line. They refused to equate respect for his office with blind obedience to his personal, familial, or worldly commands that they felt were outside the core spiritual teachings.
There's a detail in the sources about their silent suffering that is just, it's heartbreaking.
The suitcase.
The suitcase.
Yes. The sources allege that Shoghi Effendi kept a special suitcase, and it was full of petitions from his family, heart-wrenching letters from his own mother's Ruhiyyih Khanum, from his aunt Ruhiyyih Khanum, all of them begging for reconciliation to be accepted back.
And they were never answered.
Never answered. It just highlights this absolute wall of silence that the guardian enforced.
And this brings us to the core of their defense. The theological argument that the family eventually put forward, mostly through the writings of Ruhiyyih Khanum, This is where they challenged the very nature of the authority that was being claimed.
And this is a really crucial distinction for you to understand. Ruhiyyih goes right at the claims made by Ruhiyyih Khanum in her book about Shoghi Effendi, the priceless pearl.
What did she claim?
She claimed that the guardian was invested with powers of infallible guidance, that he had bestowed infallibility.
What does that mean theologically, to claim infallibility for the guardian?
Well, in the Baha'i Faith, true, essential infallibility belongs only to the manifestations of God, like Baha'u'llah. Abdu'l-Baha had a unique protected station. But to say Shoghi Effendi was bestowed with infallibility, that elevates all of his personal decisions. Who to marry, who to expel, to the level of divine unquestionable truth.
It makes obedience to the man the same as obedience to God.
Exactly. And Ruhiyyih Khanum's counter-argument just demolishes that idea. He uses a central metaphor, a brilliant one. He says that guardians, like Abdu'l-Baha and Shoghi Effendi, are not the sun of reality itself. The sun is the manifestation, Baha'u'llah. The guardians are merely mirrors that reflect the sun.
So the mirror reflects the light, but it isn't the light.
Precisely. A mirror is a creature, and as a creature, it is capable of error. And that distinction is everything. It allows the family to say, we are loyal to the sun, to Baha'u'llah, who is infallible. But we can question the mirror, Shoghi Effendi, who, as a human administrator, was not.
That distinction, mirror versus sun, that's the whole foundation of their defense. That weren't being disloyal to the faith. They were challenging what they saw as a flawed human order that had mistaken the mirror for the sun.
That is the intellectual battle. Ruhiyyih argues that the system, which he believed was heavily guided by Ruhiyyih Khanum, had it backwards. It placed blind, unquestioning obedience to the human leader above true faith and the manifestation. He says it right out. Obedience to ordinary personal or worldly orders that caused my expulsion are outside that orbit of religious duty.
And this whole theological argument comes full circle, back to that one huge administrative decision, the end of the guardianship line.
It does. Because with this framework, Ruhiyyih can then explicitly call Ruhiyyih Khanum's decision to marry Shoghi Effendi, knowing she couldn't have children, a sin greater than this was inconceivable.
Because she knew the will's command.
He alleges she knew. And so her action was a profound disregard for the institution the master had established. He claims she put her own ambitious desire for position and power ahead of the explicit covenantal requirement.
The family story is so clear then. They saw their expulsion not as a punishment for being bad Baha'is, but as the price for choosing their conscience and their family over absolute loyalty to the guardian's wife.
But we can't forget how devastating the personal punishment was. The shunning wasn't just some abstract idea, it was visceral. It was enforced by ordinary people.
Tell us that story again about Ruhiyyih being physically assaulted after he was expelled.
It just shows the level of indoctrination. Ruhiyyih said that after his expulsion, he gave a talk somewhere about the principles of the cause. As he was leaving, some Baha'i workers people who worked for the household administration came up to him. They spat in my face and slapping me in the face.
My God.
And their justification was so simple and so terrifying. They just said, you are an enemy of the cause and you give talks about it.
To be physically attacked by employees of the spiritual center for talking about the faith you were born into, that shows how successful the shunning campaign was.
The community was conditioned to see any exiled family member, no matter their bloodline, as a dangerous spiritual poison. It justified cruelty, even violence. And the exclusion went all the way to the most sacred places.
The Shrine of the Bab. That incident is it's a critical piece of evidence here.
Ruhiyyih wanted to go and pray at the shrine, a place of supreme holiness. Shoghi Effendi was away at the time, but a message came from the guardian's wife.
What did it say?
It said that if he tried to visit the shrine, orders had been given to beat me and throw me out.
To beat the grandson of Abdu'l-Baha and throw him out of the Shrine of the Bab.
And Ruhiyyih's response, as recorded in the sources, was this precise and powerful theological counterattack. He cited Baha'u'llah and the Bab themselves. He said that the shrines are places of refuge and mercy, that no one, no assembly has the right to forbid someone from seeking refuge there, or they lose their own moral authority.
His point was that God's mercy can't be limited by human leaders.
Exactly. He said, God's mercy is shed upon all of creation and is not bound by any conditions. And that whole unheard story, the silent protest, the unanswered letters, the mirror versus sun argument, and the visceral personal cruelty, that's their final testimony.
It's their explanation for why they submitted to decades of humiliation while insisting to the very end that they never broke the covenant. only the personal commands of an institution they believed had been corrupted.
We have spent our time today in a really sensitive, painful part of history, exploring what happens when institutional leadership demands absolute, total authority.
We've seen how the actual descendants of Abdu'l-Baha were systematically cut off, expelled by the guardian, Shoghi Effendi. And it was all driven by, well, by issues of personal control, marriage choices, and what was seen as a challenge to the absolute obedience demanded by a new system.
A system that, according to these sources, was largely administered and enforced by his wife, Ruhiyyih Khanum. And these actions, these personal decisions, had massive, irreversible consequences.
The most significant being the end of the line of guardianship.
A deliberate and tragic end because of the childless marriage. It went directly against the clear intent of the master's will. And that failure to continue the line just fundamentally changed the entire structure of the faith's leadership. It created an administrative vacuum that is still felt to this day.
The whole narrative really forces you to look at what happens when spiritual authority crashes into human fragility, human ambition, especially when that collision is aimed at the most sacred bonds of family. I mean, the pain of Zia Khanum, the guardian's own mother, forced into exile, it's just immense.
And we take the challenge from the source material seriously. It leaves you, the listener, with a really fundamental question. It's a question for any faith, really.
What's the question?
If a faith starts to require its followers to prioritize blind, absolute obedience to its human leadership, to the mirror over knowledge, over free choice, and over the core spiritual teachings of its founder, the Son of Reality, what happens to that faith's spiritual value over time? What happens to its ability to be just and compassionate?
That distinction between the divine inspiration and the human institution, that's the real enduring question this whole deep dive leaves us with. It's something you have to consider. Where does true loyalty ultimately belong?